Hello and welcome to a demonstration video of Microdesk BIMrx's import and export tools. Today I'll be showing how we can use BIMrx to update space parameters in a Revit model to match HVAC loads that are calculated from TrainTrace 700. Here we have a floor plan view of spaces with space tags that display calculated airflow, cooling load, and heating load parameters that we will update with BIMrx based on our trace load summary. Our first step is to open our Excel export from Trace. Here we can see we have our space names, cooling and heating loads, and calculated supply airflows that are represented in space tags. We first need to manipulate the room names column until we get the room numbers in their own cell. In this example, the designer included room name and number in their trace names, so we need to use Excel's tools to extract that data. We insert several columns to use text to columns to separate each string between spaces into their own cell. We then select all of the space names and select the Text to Columns tool. We choose space as our delimiter to split the single column of text into multiple columns. We then use find and replace to make sure any hyphens are changed to periods. Trace sometimes changes these characters automatically when exporting, so we have to be very careful to ensure the numbers match the Revit model exactly. Now we see that both the Excel file and the Revit model have periods in their space numbers. Then we go to Revit and use BIMrx's Select tool, which pops up a window of the model's visibility rule-based filters. Here I use a filter that I have already created which selects all of the spaces in the model. Next, we use BIMrx's Extract tool to select which parameters we want to export. We choose space name, space number, and the load parameters that we want to update for airflow and cooling and heating loads. Then we choose where we want to save the Excel export. So here we see that we have 152 elements that were exported, and we can open the Excel file from here. So here we have our export from BIMrx, and if we go to the Spaces tab, we see that we have all of our parameters listed here. And we have our columns for airflow, heating load, and cooling load. We are going to update these columns based on the associated columns from the Trace export. We need to copy the Trace Export tab into the BIMrx export so that we can use VLOOKUP within the same workbook to match the load data based on room numbers. For airflow, we use VLOOKUP. Our lookup value is the cell where space or room number is located. Our table array is in the Trace Load Summary tab, and we select all the relevant data. We add the $sign so that the table is an absolute reference. For our column index number, we count from left to right from the leftmost column in our table array to the column we are associating. Here we counted 11 columns from column C to column M. Lastly, we put false for an approximate match. Then we press enter. Once we use autofill, we see some airflows are not applicable, or NA, which occurs because some room numbers cannot be found. To resolve, I add an if error statement in case the space number cannot be found. A 0 will be returned instead of NA. Once we autofill again, we'll see that all of the not applicable values are changed to 0. We then copy and paste the formula and use the same VLOOKUP for heating and cooling, just changing the associated column index number. Here, if we count from left to right, we count 15 columns from the leftmost column to the heating column. We update the formula to 15 here. Then we copy and paste the same formula into the cooling column and again count from left to right, counting 10 columns from the leftmost column to the cooling column. Once again, we update the formula to 10 as our column index number. Finally, we save the Excel file and go back into Revit. Once we're back in Revit, we use the BIMrx Update tool. Here, we select the appropriate Excel file to import the updated values. Here, we see the space parameters for 152 elements have been populated. As an example, we can go into our trace export to space number 318.2 and compare it with the Revit model. Here we see that the airflow, cooling load, and heating load values match between the space parameters in the Revit model and our trace export. With all of this information now in the Revit model, we can easily get an idea of HVAC zones and select and size equipment and air terminals appropriately.